How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Gangi. Welcome to another episode of Tier Talk. Guys, great discussion today. We're going to talk about 8 possible motives in the murder of baby Emmanuel Haro. What drove Rebecca and Jake's actions? We did a few videos on this already, but now we're going to try to explore different motives. I think I have 8, but it may be 7. And what we're going to do is we're going to start with the most likely to the least likely, but we do have a lot to cover today. I got some great questions that I'm going to toss to Joe and myself to answer. But guys, when I ask those questions, feel free to answer them as well, because this community has been excellent. They're giving us information. If we make a mistake, they update us. And actually, there's some clarity I want to provide as well in regards to his time at Riverside. I think it was Riverside County Jail back in 2023 for his first offense. So let's do this. Joe, if you don't mind, could you introduce yourself? And then I want to go through a quick little background of what happened, where we're at, and then go right into the discussion. Yo, you're muted, Joe.
Sorry. My name is Joe Pomponio. I'm a retired lieutenant from the Texas Department of Corrections, 29 years, 6 months. Currently working as an assistant jail administrator in our local county sheriff's office and a panel member here for Tier Talk.
Yes, and we're very excited for this discussion. You guys have been very responsive with our last few discussions. It's great. My channel is finally getting the views that I've been waiting for and the subscriber turnaround, which is amazing. And then I've been responding back to almost every comment. I think Joe's been doing it too, because believe it or not, the comments are great because they not only appreciate the content, but they educate us and they're pointing us into right direction so we can provide better content. So I just want to read something from People Magazine. So for people that aren't familiar with the case, the title, the article I'm reading is written by, let's see, Shama Flam. Just make sure I'm saying, Sharna Flam. Guys, I'm over 40 now, so my vision is not as flexible as it used to be. Emmanuel Haro's parents charged with murder, as police say 7-month-old was never kidnapped. So Rebecca and Jake Haro were arrested on Friday, August 22nd, in connection to their infant son's death. So what do you need to know out of all this? Rebecca Haro reported on Thursday, August 14th, that her 7-month-old son, Emmanuel, was kidnapped in Riverside County Jail. So guys, let me just give you, I have some pictures here that I'd like to show you. So this is actually them being arrested. That's Rebecca on the left being taken into custody on the 22nd. And that's Jake on the right. This is them before they were taken into custody when they're making pleas to help them find their son. And this is Emmanuel. That is the boy that is missing, but people at this point presume that the boy is now deceased. And I believe there's enough evidence around the house for the police to make that assumption or confirmation, depending on the evidence, and then go ahead and charge these 2 individuals with murder. Now, during the following week, the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department investigated his kidnapping, and on Friday, August 22nd, authorities said Emmanuel was not kidnapped and was deceased. His mother and father, Jake Haro, were charged with murder. So I'm curious to see what they discovered in and around the house. So real quick, Rebecca and Jake Haro were charged with murder in relation to their son Emmanuel's disappearance, and police now say their 7-month-old was never kidnapped. The San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department announced their arrest on Friday, August 22nd, and confirmed both were booked in a Riverside County jail. So this is where Jake may have been before, back in 2023, when he was charged with child cruelty for what he did to his 10-week-old daughter, Promise, back in 2018. I think her name was Promise Faith. Now, someone has also messaged me and said that that was the name that she wasn't originally named Promise Faith, that they changed that name after the incident, maybe because of her willingness to survive. Okay, so Riverside County Jail without bail. No other arrests have been made and no other suspects have been named. Rebecca, 32, first reported the infant went missing on Thursday, August 14th. She claimed an attacker hit her and kidnapped her baby from outside a store. However, authorities said on Friday, August 22nd, that Emmanuel's kidnapping did not occur based on the evidence, which included numerous interviews, search warrants, and closely analyzed digital and electronic evidence. Now, it is believed Emmanuel is deceased and the search to recover his remains is ongoing, and that's per the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department. These arrests mark a significant development. Our focus remains on finding Emmanuel. The circumstances surrounding this investigation are tragic, and we'll continue to search for Emmanuel. And that's from Sheriff Shannon Dykes. And I trust our justice system will hold the parents accountable. The investigation began when Rebecca reported his disappearance on Thursday, August 14th. Rebecca previously said that day she and Jake were at a local park with their 3 children for their son's football practice. She drove to Big 5 Sporting Goods store to buy her son a mouth guard and took Emmanuel with her. She told the outlet she parked the car and was setting up to change Emmanuel when she heard someone say "Hola," and then lost consciousness, she claimed. She told the outlet that once she woke up, the baby was nowhere to be found. She appeared to have a black eye when she spoke to the TV station. Over the weekend, authorities observed what they believed were inconsistencies in her story. Rebecca was confronted with inconsistencies in her initial statement and declined to continue with the interview. And this comes from the Sheriff's Department, San Bernardino. And this was on August 17th. In 2023, now we're going to backtrack, Jake was convicted of child cruelty after a 10-week-old girl was treated for broken bones in October of 2018. And this comes from the Orange County Register, citing court documents. Jake pleaded guilty to willful child cruelty in June of 2023 and was sentenced to 180 days in the sheriff's work release program, received a suspended 4-year prison sentence, and ordered to attend a child abuser treatment program per the outlet. Jake was also due in court on September 2nd on an unrelated charge of being a felon or addict in possession of a firearm. And that's what the register reports. Now, I wanted to show you guys something. So I looked up a work release program. I wanted to see what that work release program is because some of the people that I'm following the channel have been nice enough to say Gangi, he was given 180 days, but he only served 1 day in jail. The rest was for a work release program. And I believe it was the work release program in Riverside County Jail. So I do have a summary of that program. If anybody works for Riverside County Jail, maybe you can let me know if this is correct or not. But this is the information I was able to dig up. So Jake Haro pleaded guilty to a felony child endangerment and was sentenced to felony probation for 4 years in order to serve 180 days in jail on a work release program. That comes from NBC Los Angeles. And that's according to Riverside County District Attorney. Haro pleaded guilty in June of 2023. He was placed on 4 years of felony probation and ordered to serve 180 days in a jail on a work release program. A 6-year prison term was suspended as part of the plea. Based on the records, this would have been through the Riverside County Sheriff's Department system. And guys, please let me know. I just love to have, let me know if I'm going in the right direction. Riverside County Sheriff's Department system, since that's the jurisdiction that handled this case. There are 5 jails or correctional facilities in Riverside County, all managed by the Sheriff's Department Corrections Division. And that comes from, I can tell you right now where that comes from. That comes from Riverside County Sheriff. That's from their webpage. Now, how Riverside County work release program operates. The objective of the part-time work release program is to offer an alternative in lieu of jail time. And again, I want to thank the people that have been commenting because you led me to this. Must work a minimum of 1 to 2 days a week at an assigned job site and must work 8 to 10 hours a day in lieu of one day of sentence. And that's coming from the website. Work release programs, also known as work follows or community correction programs, are court-ordered or jail-administered initiatives that allow eligible inmates to maintain outside employment or participate in vocational training while serving their sentence. So, yes, the information that I referred to, Jake Haro did serve his 180-day sentence through Riverside County Work Release Program rather than traditional incarceration, which allowed him to maintain employment during the day while returning to custody in the evening. So, Joe, I just wanted to bring that up because people are nice enough to kind of guide me in the right direction, which is great because they enjoy the content, and now they're trying to help me make it better. So basically, he was in a work release program, so he probably spent 1 day in jail. They put him on the work release program, which allowed him a lot more freedom than other individuals. So that even makes it actually a little bit more, just a little bit more unbelievable, just in my opinion, based on what he's done. Or what he did do. But what's your thoughts on that, Joe? Just before we move forward.
Yeah, that makes it a little more unbelievable to me as well. I mean, we're going to take somebody who just abused a child and physically disfigured this child for the rest of her life, and we're going to let him go out into society and work 8 to 10 hours a day in the general public. Again. The sentence just did not fit the crime.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see what is the criteria for one of those work release programs. What are the crimes that don't make you ineligible? So, I'm curious to see how they filter who's eligible to do that. So guys, again, this is why we have this great community. Maybe if someone's aware of these type of programs, maybe you can let us know what's the criteria that would make you ineligible to be on a work release program. And maybe, me and Joe could also look that up as well. Now, this is going to be an interesting discussion because we're going to be talking about, I put 8 possible motives, but as I'm looking through this, I'm thinking maybe 7. Now, granted, I want to mention something. Motive is the why. The intent is the what. The intent is what you want to prove. Motive, I mean, it's great to have it, but really the intent matters. And the reason why I kind of know this, and I'm sure Joe knows the same, is that let's say I decide to write up an inmate, and I know what they did. Sometimes I don't care why they did it. You're getting rid of. So sometimes when they go ahead and give me the excuse as to why they did it, all I care about is the fact that they did it. So the fact that they did it, that's the what. Their why, sometimes the why is what we have to worry about, especially in cases like this, because the why, that's what people try to maneuver around. They try to gain sympathy or blame or whatever it is. So the motive is a little bit more harder to prove, if you will. And I got another scenario. Joe was a jail investigator, so Joe may relate to this as well. Just to kind of make something translate from our world to the outside world. And this will relate to here. If I have a corrupt staff that I know is bringing in drugs, or if I know they're bringing in cell phones, right? And I know that's their intent. They want to bring in drugs. They want to bring in a cell phone, whatever it is. But I want the motive. I want to prove that they're also distributing it to the inmate population, which is really the harder catch. I may have to allow, this is the scary thing, I may have to allow them to enter that facility. And then I may have to allow for some controlled transaction to take place. So then I can solidify the motive because, yes, I got them past the metal detector. So I know they came in. I know they're bringing in the phones and the drugs. So I got their intent, but the motive is what really adds a little bit of, it substantiates, because then when we go to bring to court, what they're going to focus on or what they're going to challenge is the reasoning. Oh, wait a second. I forgot I had the phone on me, or these were my personal stash. I didn't want to distribute it. Okay, well, I have you on video distributing it. So now the motive is pretty slam dunk. I think that's a great way of explaining the difference. What's your thoughts, Joe? You were a jail investigator.
Yeah, motive is important. In the end, the end result is that they're caught. Some people do it for the fast money. Some people do it because they came in with the intent on doing it anyway, because they may be gang related. They may be, there's a whole plethora as to why, but motive does shore the case up a little bit more. This way you can kind of prove that, they intended on doing this from day one of their employment, or maybe because they had a homeboy who's incarcerated and they're doing it to help them out. Motive actually helps shore up the case a lot. Outside, they can do all kinds of buy busts. They set up meetings with undercovers and they give them the drugs and they'll ask them questions. Is this just going to your homeboy? Make sure it gets to my homeboy, or you spreading it around. They try to get those motives on camera, on tape before, they actually make the arrest. So it's motive actually helps a lot.
Yeah, and guys, when it comes to the work release program, just to say, the Riverside County Jail, you must be sentenced to the jail. So if you were sentenced to state corrections or doing that, you would be ineligible. But I'm just curious if anybody from the outside could maybe elaborate on that. All right, so I'm gonna do the motives from the most likely to the least likely in this case here. So if you guys are following along, there could be more, I don't know, but I think these are pretty good spot on ones, and maybe we could follow up, and as the case develops, we could kind of see which one they're going to go with. And with that said, by the way, we're going to show them first in isolation, but most of the time, and I think Joe would also be able to explain this, they blend, right? It's never just one in total isolation, but we're going to go through it first in total isolation. But I want you to know that when it comes to motives, it could be multiple motives running at one time. Would you agree with that, Joe?
Yeah, I mean, there's no one single thing. Normally it's a multitude of things that play a part in it. You may think you're going into it for one reason, but you're actually coming out, for two or three different reasons.
All right, let me start with the first one. So the first one I got, which I think is the most likely, is going to be avoiding criminal consequences. So the overarching motive encompassing both protecting Jake from renewed scrutiny due to his child cruelty conviction and eliminating the CPS monitoring that Emmanuel's presence required. Emmanuel's represented an ongoing liability that could expose them to imprisonment. This is the strongest theory supported by Rebecca's false kidnapping narrative and the abrupt termination of police interviews when contradictions emerge. So Joe, if avoiding prison was the main driver, does that suggest their decisions were more coldly calculated than emotionally reactive?
Yeah, I mean, in short, their mindset was probably no body, no crime. And because of the fact that he does have a criminal history, he has a criminal past. I'm not quite sure about her, but she was probably scared enough, and given the situation however it unfolded, what led to this, child being hurt. She knows that she's complicit in this now too. So now she's an equal partner in this. So avoiding the criminal consequences of their actions is probably number one on the list. I'd have to agree.
Yeah, and you know what's funny? This is the scary thing, because this is what I called basically. I lean this towards survival. At the end of the day, let's say he beat up the child, but he knows he has this past history. Now he could try to manipulate Rebecca into covering for him, because he could say, "Hey, listen, I made a mistake. I went too far with Emmanuel, and if we go to report this in, or if we go to take the medical, all they're going to do is look at my record, and they're not going to think that this was a mistake. They're going to think that this is who I am, and I'm going to get arrested for it." So he's going to lean on her, and she could fall for. So I mean, maybe she is someone that maybe just getting caught up in the game. Maybe she didn't. Maybe she's not a bad mother to some extent. Maybe, right now she unfortunately is doing what she can to protect Jake, and he took advantage of that vulnerability. Again, granted, I try to be very objective here on this channel. I think Joe does as well. There are some people that will completely judge somebody by their actions, but the problem is it's going to paint a biased picture that will easily close any window for any other explored motive. So I'm going to try to be as objective as I can be. And in this case here, I'm pushing for the first motive on Jake, because I could see him, maybe I'm wrong. And again, this is a little bit biased, but maybe I'm wrong, but I could see him being the aggressor, going a little too far, and then trying to manipulate Rebecca into not doing anything about it, and then being the one to create the narrative because she would be more believable. That's just my opinion for the first one. And then go ahead, Joe. Sorry.
And, it's a question of, did she even know about his criminal history until it was too late?
Well, so that's a great point. How much did she know about him? And you're right, Joe. Did she? It might have
been one of those things where he did what he did to the child, and when she might have attempted to try to report that something happened, and he said, "No, you can't do this because I have a charge from back in the day," and it might have been one of them cases where she didn't know about his criminal history until it was too late, until she was already in the middle of this situation with him.
Yeah, so that's something to explore. Did she know the man she was marrying? And is this a shock? Or maybe he exposed it when this issue occurred and say, "Hey, listen, you may not know this, but I got stuff on my record." Or did she truly know who she was marrying, including what he did, and then was willing to put this individual next to her children, which now you start seeing some bad motherly decisions. Hey, real quick, I got some answers on this. So for what should eliminate you from being eligible for this work release program should be violent or sex-related convictions, so generally excluded from eligibility across California work release programs, history of escape or absconding, which that makes sense, outstanding warrants or pending charges, because then there could be a risk that you're going to jump, serious health or psychological limitations, active substance abuse, and lack of reliable transportation or employment. So that's interesting, because if you go to the first disqualifying factor, violent or sex-related convictions, they may not consider child cruelty a violent offense. We see it by what they've done to the individual. I could see that Promise. Look at her again. 3% of her brain working, permanently damaged, can't walk, can't see. She had broken ribs. It looked like it was a pattern of abuse. But maybe cruelty is the less violent of the charge. Maybe it's not seen as a violent charge. And I'm going to look that up a little bit real quick. I just want to get to the next part. Okay, so this, what I feel, if I had to choose what was the most likely, I was leaning on this as the most likely. I think I gave him a little bit more influence in this situation, if you will. So that was, to me, is the most likely. I think that's what's going to happen. I think obviously they're separated, and eventually I think what they're going to try to do is they probably know at this point who is mainly responsible for killing the child. So maybe what they'll do is they'll work with the mother to see if they can cut some deals with her, and then maybe push some evidence more towards Jake. Maybe that explains why the separation is there, and why, if they're co-defendants, why we don't want them to be communicating at this point, because whatever the detectives are trying to do with her right now, they don't need that plan explained to him. So basically, I would be eliminating a lot of the communication that they would be having with each other. Does that make sense, Joe? You're used to that process, right?
Yeah, definitely. You don't, if they're co-defendants in the same, or co-conspirators in the same crime, you don't want them together, because, at some point, during the investigation, you're going to try to use one against the other to build your case. So you definitely don't want them. You don't want them communicating with each other. You don't, you want to, especially in her case, because females are more adept to giving information once they realize the totality of the situation, especially if they weren't, initially complicit in what took place, not knowing his background, this, that, and the other. And, now she's got time to sit in her cell and go, you know what, that son of a bitch,
Now, real quick, if someone's from California, real quick, legally child cruelty is not listed as a violent felony. Practically is viewed as violent behavior by many, but eligibility for programs like work release depends on local sheriff's discretion. So what do they consider as violent felonies? Rape, murder, robbery, kidnapping, arson that causes injury. But willful cruelty to a child is not listed as a violent felony. So there's a gap. There's a gap there, obviously. All right, sorry, I wanted to get that out. So, guys, thank you, for the people that are pointing me in the right direction. All right, so that's the first. That's the one I think was most likely the main motive, but I have a few more. And this kind of combines with the fatal incident. Whether through deliberate violence or fatal neglect, Emmanuel likely died in their care. The staged kidnapping served multiple functions, deflecting suspicion outwards, creating the illusion of an external threat, and obscuring the true cause of death while delaying detection. The sophistication of the hoax suggests planning rather than pure panic. So now you have afterthought. Guys, I'm going to tell you something right now. Obviously, if there's stuff that's premeditated, that adds a lot to it, but also cleaning up afterwards. There's no way you're going to be able to get any type of insanity or anything if you make an effort to clean up what you've done. So, Joe, the question here is, what does the effort to stage a kidnapping tell us about their ability to plan under pressure?
Yeah, it just means they're more diabolical than your normal person. When people make mistakes, they usually don't think about how they can cover it up. They think about, how do I fix this? What do I do now? Where this guy, has probably put some forethought into what he was going to do and how he was going to cover it up. Concealing the incident really, to me, is not much different than, somebody who's trying to avoid, criminal consequences. In this case, this guy probably, for lack of a better term, at some point, is probably going to blame the victim, the child. Well, he was sick. He had this wrong with him. He had that wrong with him. And instead of taking ownership of what he did.
Yeah, and I want to mention something. This could maybe explain why it took many days. They believe that he's been deceased for a while, and it took many days for them to go ahead and play this out because they probably thought about it. They probably said, hey, what's the route we can take to go ahead and make sure that we're protected? So there's going to be some cleanup. There's going to be a bunch of things. And then when they decide, okay, we're going to run this, then this whole thing becomes a big plan. Unfortunately, whatever was around the house or inside the house, this is what's going to wind up exposing them. And the funny thing is, this is what my thoughts would be. They spent all this time trying to figure out how to clean it up, and they never once decided that the kid needs help. There was no remorse, no guilt. I mean, they strictly went into plan mode. And I'm sure maybe Jake influenced it. Jake has the history of it. I mean, but could it be the mother? Maybe. But they spent time planning this instead of actually trying to do something to protect the child. So that to me shows that there was no remorse, no guilt. At this point, this was about CYA. Cover my ass became cover our ass, because I'm assuming this too, Joe. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm right. He could influence her to a certain point, and let's say he tries to play the route, I didn't mean to do this. If you love me, whatever it is, maybe you could work with me to help cover this up. And if she's like, no, this is my son, I'm not going to do that. Then he goes, well, you know what? Then you're going to be involved too, because we both did this together. Now the change becomes now the influence becomes a bit different. He's going to try it one way, and then I could see when maybe she's a bit resistant, doesn't want to go that route, and then all of a sudden now they're both covering their ass because he says, hey, you want to put me down on this? You're going down too. Yeah. Let's see how this works. Does that make sense, Joe?
Yeah, and that's why I was, and that's why what led me to say that, did she even know about his history, his background? Because that situation can definitely unfold with the path of least resistance first, and then the path of total resistance, where he's basically extorting her into the situation of the fact that hey, it's not just my son, you're part of this too. So she may have been pressured. Like I said, I don't know much about her background, so I don't know her full story, but that's an absolute possibility.
Yeah, and again, the intent was they eventually murdered the child when they decide not to give the child help. To me, that's an intentional decision to let the child suffer, let the child feel pain and agony. So to me, that's where the murder comes in. Whether he, when he was doing whatever it was to the child, even if his intent was to not murder the child, it becomes that way because you did not seek help for that child. And if I was prosecution, I would push that. If you didn't want to have the child die, then these are the steps you could have took. Instead, you allowed the child to suffer. And then eventually whether you took the child out or whether you let the child die and then you hid the child somewhere, the intent is clear. You wanted the child to die because you weren't going to bring that child to get help. And then again, the motive is what we're discussing now. So I got the reactive panic management. Now look how these all connect. So again, we're kind of showing them in isolation, but they're all connecting. I mean, everybody here could see how we're building this great narrative here. So the reactive panic management is, while the staging shows premeditation in the cover-up, the underlying incident may have triggered panic-driven decision-making. However, the coordinated false narrative indicates this panic was channeled into calculated concealment rather than chaotic response. So, Joe, at what point does panic stop being an excuse and starts becoming part of a deliberate crime?
Yeah, what do they call it? The oh shit factor. Oh shit, this is what I just did. Then from that point, he intentionally shifts to a criminal deflection where we go from this is what I did to, oh, my son's missing. So he to me he had this calculated from the moment he did it. No doubt in my mind that and again, it's one of those things where was she even home at the time this happened? How complicit was she in this? And that led her to spin this story about a missing child. And, so, when at the end of the day, they're both pretty complicit in this. And I think for him, I think this is more of a calculated plan to shift, the blame from him outward.
Yeah. And what's funny, what's going to hurt her is the fact that she did calculate a story, because now she is guilty through association.
Yep.
And you want to hear something funny, Joe? I could picture panic as soon as, let's say the child got so badly hurt, or he did murder the child at that point, and now it's hectic. Now they're trying to figure out what to do. But I'll guarantee you, once the decision was made, there's no longer panic. Now it's controlled. Yeah. This is what we're going to do. Wait a couple of days. Let me do some cleaning up or whatever it is. And then let me go ahead and we're going to create this narrative. And again, that's if Jake is the main person who did it, and then the wife seems to be part of the cover-up. So I could picture that 100%, that it was panic, but then eventually when they decided to make that decision, it's a controlled decision. They're not making decision out of panic. They're making decision because this is their controlled resolution to protect themselves. That's what, for me, when you look at somebody panicking, I'm going to ask, well, what's the end result? What's the panic heading towards? Well, the panic right now is we don't want to get caught. So you don't want to do the right thing. That's what's causing the concern, technically, because technically it seems to be a bit challenging as to what to do, because you got something in the mix that doesn't need to be there, which is how to protect yourself. Because technically, if this happened to any normal person, the decision would be quick. Let's get that baby to a hospital. Let's do what we got to do. Let's make sure the baby's okay. But the reason why they were panicking was not based on what they need to do for the baby, but what they need to do for themselves. Would you agree with that, Joe?
Yeah. I mean, this is, we talked about the what if game for correctional staff, playing that what if game. And this is definitely the opposite. This is the criminals playing the what if game. What if this topic comes up? What if this question gets asked? What if this question gets asked? They're already, in their mind, they're already 2 steps ahead of law enforcement. So, they have a plan, they're enacting it. And, this guy, like I said, he to me, it just seems like he had a plan from the get go, that, it was definite that this child was going to disappear. It was definite that, he wasn't going to accept responsibility. It was a definite that he was going to try to spin a lie in the media. And you even look at the picture of him and his wife, standing out there in public holding a picture of this child, and he's got his arm around his wife and kind of a loving embrace. When you're in a state of panic because of something that you just did, you're not worried about having the picture perfect portrait of yourself out there in the media. You're going to be frantic. You're going to be, where's my child? There's just so many things about this that that screams foul, that it's unbelievable.
By the way, guys, me and Joe could easily do a show where it looks like the woman is the dominant influence, Rebecca, but I don't think that's where the evidence is pointing. So right now we're going to kind of stay focused with this narrative. But eventually, if something shifts, we could work on that motive as well. But I think we're headed in the right direction based on the person's history and just where we're at now and how the police have started separating them already. I believe Jake Haro went to one jail and then he got moved to another jail. Okay, so now these are more of the less likely ones, but I still think have some connection to the greater motive. So the one I got here is domestic control dynamic. This is more about household dysfunction or relationship driven. So I thought it encompasses both Jake's potential dominance over Rebecca, so leading her to act out of loyalty, manipulation, or fear, which we discussed, and the treatment of Emmanuel as a burden rather than a child to protect. So in an unstable household, infants can tragically become targets of displaced frustration and stress. And we talked about that in the episode yesterday, where maybe the crying, the person wigged out, impulsively did something. But the problem is the child, it could be seen, at least for the first incident with Promise, that she had bruises that were healing. So this is not impulsive. This is a pattern. And maybe in my mind, I'm thinking that pattern could have carried the same way with Emmanuel, and maybe we'll find that when his body gets discovered. But Joe, how much responsibility should be placed on household power dynamics when analyzing crimes against children?
Well, I mean, you always in a relationship, you got the dominant person, you got the passive person. You know, most people are together because opposites attract. You know, they kind of complement each other on what one's missing and the other one doesn't have. And given this case, I can totally see him being the dominant in this. Again, I don't know much about her background, her bringing up, and what kind of person she was. But I can totally see him being the manipulative person in this relationship to make her go along with the plan.
Yeah, I mean, that's the first thing I look at, is who may have control in the relationship. I think when she gave her false narrative, I think that was definitely influenced by him to create. The first thing I look at, which is not 100%, but hear me, I look at the size. He's a lot bigger than she is, because size does matter. But stronger than that is the person's mental willpower, of course, obviously, how smart they could be, or, the image that they sell. But I believe there is a dynamic here that does put him in a little bit more control. And I would love people's opinion on this question as well. I think that's a unique question, because, I mean, we got to push towards one way, is it him? And let's create the narrative with that in mind. But maybe people have another narrative that they want to put on the channel, backed with a little bit more evidence. Let's just see where that goes. So this is definitely caught in with this, I believe. Again, they don't always, these motives, they work in tandem. So eliminating witness evidence. So if ongoing abuse was occurring, Emmanuel represented both physical evidence and potential future disclosure. Removing him eliminated the problem that brought authorities to their attention and prevented future revelation of systematic mistreatment. So, Joe, does removing a child to hide evidence suggest the abuse was ongoing rather than isolated?
Yeah, definitely, because they didn't, he didn't do away with his first child. So him doing away with this child definitely, or they doing away with this child definitely shows that there's a pattern to his criminal behavior, and her being complicit in this, because I just don't see a normal, rational human seeing something like this happen to a child and going along with getting rid of a child's body, knowing that at some point you're going to get caught anyway. In the end run, I'm sure they're both separated from each other. And, at some point, I totally foresee him, shifting the blame to her, and, her to him.
Yeah. And I want to mention something, guys, matters most is what you do after the incident occurs. Integrity doesn't come when you're being discovered and then you try to do the right thing. It's what, if you're doing the right thing without the pressure to do the right thing. That's what matters. So I think here, if when they find the body, if there are injuries that are older, then you see a pattern of abuse. Then you see the fact that, well, you have many times that did the right thing, you didn't do the right thing, and now this was purely cover up. And why can I assume that? Because you never did it right the first time. So if I got enough to show that you got some past injuries here, and there's enough of a pattern, I could safely predict that the pattern is that you were never going to plan on bringing this kid in for any help, because he's got bruise marks and injuries that are months and years old, and we have nothing on record that shows that you've ever brought him to receive any medical attention. Does that make sense, Joe, or no?
Yeah, I mean, and you can tell just by his actions, he never planned on doing the right thing to begin with. So, he's damn sure not going to start now.
All right, and let's see. Okay, so I got two more, Joe, and then we can start wrapping up. But I have one more area I want to touch on too after this. But I have two more here. Psychological incapacity. So mental health factors, substance abuse, or past trauma that may have impaired judgment, created distorted thinking patterns, or influenced the capacity to provide appropriate care. this could have contributed to both the initial harm and the decision making around concealment. Now, should psychological incapacity be viewed as an explanation for their actions or as another layer of accountability? Now, my world, I will be honest with you. Believe it or not, I know a lot of people think that people that are drug users, alcohol, whatever, that it's a crime that really doesn't hurt anybody, only hurts the user. And I disagree. If you look at a lot of crimes, a lot of the underneath factors are usually somebody did it on some type of substance abuse, whether they were drunk or something that eliminated their want to do the right thing and pushes more on their impulse, more on their emotion. So I always believe that most crimes, not all, but most, do have some type of misuse of drugs or misuse of alcohol as an underlying factor. So for me, when someone goes to utilize that, I'm sorry, man. I see that as just being an excuse. And again, I'm not. I know there are people that do suffer from these concerns, and I get it. But the problem is when you start hurting others, and you're still committed to drinking and taking drugs, I don't feel sorry for you anymore, because now what you're doing is affecting the lives of others. And at this point here, your choice is now have accountability connected to it. What's your thoughts, Joe?
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to drug crimes, it's one thing. They call it a victimless crime, but it's not. There's always going to be a victim. Drug users steal to be able to, complete their habits.
Maintain their habits. I know what you're getting at.
Or maintain their habits, yeah. And most of the time it's family members, friends, and I see it every day. I see the crying mothers, I see the crying fathers and sisters, brothers, sons, daughters, because they truly love this person, but they have stole from them so many times that in order to maintain their habit, that there just comes a point where they're done. So it's not really a victimless crime. Now with this guy, we don't, we really don't know nothing about, we don't know anything about his social upbringing. Was he the type of kid that, that killed the neighborhood animals just because he could? Did he, what kind of kid was he when he was coming up? We don't really know much about his upbringing to know that, going into adulthood, that he carried over things in his mind that he thought were not wrong. But regardless, every human knows that it's wrong to commit a crime, a physical crime against another human, without consequences, just because of the fact that you're inflicting some sort of physical pain, emotional pain on another human being. So it's just, not without having much background on this guy and his childhood upbringing, it's kind of hard to play.
Yeah, we have to stop enabling those excuses, because then they start justifying it, and now they can commit to a wrong act and believe that they're actually right in doing so, because we've accepted that level of blame, that it's not me, it's the demon I'm battling, and at that point here, it's always been an excuse, and we have to start showing zero tolerance for that. Now, to mention something here, Joe, real quick, about motive and intent. So this is real quick, guys. I want to mention that motive and intent interact with each other, simultaneous operations. So multiple motives likely function together rather than in isolation. The legal self-preservation motive provided the rational framework, while emotional, psychological factors supplied the energy for harmful actions. So I wanted to give an example. Suppose Emmanuel suffered a fatal injury due to neglect or abuse. Now concealing the fatal incident. In the immediate aftermath, Rebecca and Jake likely experienced reactive panic, realizing that authorities would not only investigate Emmanuel's death, but also re-examine Jake's past child cruelty conviction, which we discussed. At that moment, legal self-preservation became the dominant driver. Emmanuel's death meant renewed child protective service involvement, criminal liability, and possible prison time. So to avoid this, they stage a kidnapping. The false narrative served dual purpose, protecting Jake from exposure and consequences, and 2, erasing Emmanuel as both evidence of past abuse and a trigger for future monitoring. So this is kind of where we eliminate the witness evidence. We have a few things going on at once. Underlying all this was the household dysfunction dynamic. If Emmanuel was seen as a burden, their psychological incapacity, domestic instability, and resource strain amplified the willingness to rationalize his removal. So I want a breakdown of the mix. So we have the trigger and event, which is a fatal incident, abuse or neglect. Then you have the emotional reaction, panic and fear of discovery, the strategic calculation, which we all discussed this, by the way, shifted into a deliberate cover-up. So that's the kidnapping hoax. And the underlying environment, dysfunctional household where Emmanuel's life was already undervalued. So this shows how motives aren't cleanly isolated. The cover-up, the secondary cluster, was powered by legal self-preservation. That's the primary cluster. While household dysfunctions created the conditions that made both harm and concealment more likely. So, Joe, when multiple motives overlap, how should investigators, and you've been an investigator, determine which one was the true driver?
Well, I mean, you got to look at their background. You got to look at their mindset. Their past. Everybody has a motive, whether it's money, whether it's sanity, peace and quiet, whatever. You got to take all that into consideration when you're interviewing somebody, and it's really no different in a DOC. Somebody, take for example an inmate who's always in protective custody. When you interview him, it's the same mindset. The guy was convicted; he was a thief. He's always going to be a thief. He continues to thief, even from his own cellmates. And you got to look at that mindset, because there's always going to be one motive that stands above the others.
Yeah, and one thing in corrections that we learn, which does take time, is we learn to identify patterns. Patterns will soon, whether intentionally or not, show you what the real motive is. And usually when people try to hide something, they're not just trying to hide what was immediately now. They're trying to hide the history of that and what led to it. So that's a tough thing when you have a body like Emmanuel that can't be found, because now it's not even just about proving that they killed him, but rather the pattern. What type of people are we dealing with? Was this accidental? Was this someone that pre-planned it? So again, when you try to cover evidence, you cover the pattern. And I think me, Joe, Russ, we definitely understand patterns, because that's all we do in corrections is we know where the bigger picture is, and we try to look for the patterns that relate to any conflict to that bigger picture that we're trying to achieve. And sometimes you have things in isolation, and sometimes you have things that partner, and that could be a concern. But I think the people that are experts, the people that prevent, know where things can partner up and be a problem later on. And that's where you have expert investigators here who, when they look backwards, they could say, hey, guys, this wasn't just a one-time thing. There's clearly patterns here that show you not only this person know what they were doing, but the person needs to be locked up, 100%. I got one last part here, sorry, Joe. I apologize. I was thinking of Russ. And maybe I'm going to have you and Russ on together later in the week. I'm supposed to maybe have an FBI investigator on. I have some questions I want to ask him as well. And then I'm going to try to bring a little bit more guests, but I always want to have Joe with me or Russ with me as we have the discussion, because what you guys put in, I think should also be with the guests, because there are certain things that I don't know that you guys know, and vice versa. And guys, the more this channel grows, I've been doing this for, I don't know, since 2012, but officially on YouTube since 2017. This is the most traffic I've had constantly. So I'm going to keep giving it this way and working my best to give you guys what you want. So keep helping me by helping getting this channel growing, because I want my silver play button. I really do. I've been wanting that for years, just to prove that what I have has value. And the older content matters too, guys, because there's a lot you can learn from working in the profession of corrections that does apply to the real world, because we're applying it right now. This is 22 and a half years, almost 23 years of experience, and Joe's got over 30. And this is why we could talk so freely of this. And yet we're not called out a lot on our knowledge, which is insane, because it is our own little world there. All right, so I wanted to do intent versus motive distinction. I wanted to do it one more time just to paint a better picture. So motive equals why they acted. So motive is the underlying reasoning that explains what was driving them emotionally or psychologically. So this is the why. It doesn't prove guilt, but it provides context for why someone might commit a crime. Now, mind you guys, it's the motive that people try to manipulate. It's the motive that they try to gain sympathy, or, I may have hit my wife, but the reason why I did it was A, B, C, D. So usually people that look to try to rehabilitate, they try to get the people to kind of be truthful on why they did it. It's not about a blame game. What was the real motive? You wanted power, and your wife was somebody an object that you owned. So you know, all this other stuff really doesn't matter. At the end of the day, the why you have to be very careful for, because it can be easily crafted in a way to get favor. So I want to do an example from Emmanuel's case. So the legal self-preservation motive, that's the one thing I wanted to put out there. They wanted to avoid jail time, child protective service involvement, and exposure of Jake's prior conviction. And then you have the household dysfunction motive. They saw Emmanuel as a burden or problem, not a child to protect. So the motive answers, why would they do this? Now the intent, that matters. That's something prosecutors need to get a hold of. Motive, I mean, love to have it. It adds that final punch, but I can go with intent and still get something there. So intent is what they meant to do. So regardless of what the outcome was, it's what they meant to do. I know there's a thing I say with chess. I remember someone playing chess. I'm not a good chess player, but someone was playing me and they said, hey, I don't mean to, but I just want to let you know, checkmate. Okay, but you still checkmated me. So it doesn't really matter what you thought. I'm still suffering the outcome of being checkmated. So intent refers to the mental state at the time of the act, whether they deliberately planned harm or acted in a moment of recklessness or panic. It is about decision-making at the exact moment of action, not the underlining why. Because the underlining why is what people try to manipulate. At the end of the day, what did you do? I killed this child. But I don't care why at this point. I need to prove that you killed the child. Everything else could be discovered later through defense when you try to come up with when you know that you're guilty of this and the evidence is there. Now they start crafting their why. And then that's where the prosecutors really have to work their game and really push the intent. Hey, regardless of the why, everybody heard their why, but we still have a child that's dead. So an example in Emmanuel's case, if they deliberately harmed Emmanuel with the purpose of removing him, that shows intent to kill. And that could happen with the cover-up. Now, granted, if they did hurt him and they didn't seek to get him help right away, then their negligence knew what would be the outcome if you didn't get him help. He could have died. Did you guys know that? Would a reasonable adult know that if you did not get this child help, he could die? And if the jury believes that, yes, a reasonable adult would know that what you did to this child would have killed him if you didn't get him help, then that could be enough to push for murder. Again, just negligence, yes, but murder because you did not help the child when you caused that, when you caused the physical harm to them. If Emmanuel died from neglect or an uncontrolled outburst and the cover-up was planned afterward, their intent during the act it may not have been seen as murder, but the intent afterward was to deceive investigators. So does that make sense? That's kind of what I'm saying, right, Joe? It says, if Emmanuel died from neglect or an uncontrolled outburst and the cover-up was planned afterwards, their intent during the act may not have been murder, but the intent afterward was to deceive investigators. So that could be pushed as you knew what you were doing. At that point, that led to the death of the child. And basically the intent is, what did they mean to do at that moment? The child needed help. I decided not to help the child, but I'm the one that caused the pain that led the child to be in that condition. So now how do they interact? Motive provided the fuel, protect Jake, avoid CPS, remove a burden. Intent determined the form of action, whether they purposely killed Emmanuel or whether the death occurred and they intentionally staged a cover-up. So the legal angle, courts don't need a motive to prove guilt, but prosecutors often use motive to strengthen the case narrative. Intent, however, must be proven. Intent to kill versus intent to mislead. So here's the evidence hierarchy here. And then I got one more question for you, Joe, before we wrap up. The stage kidnapping story and interview termination must strongly support motives involving deliberate concealment and legal self-preservation. Because remember, guys, once there was inconsistencies in the stories, they wanted to do no more interviews. So now you have, it supports the motive of involving deliberate concealment and legal self-preservation, while household dysfunction motives explain the condition that made harm possible. So, Joe, last question. In this case, which is more important to proving guilt? Establishing motive, or, as we said, proving intent?
For me, I think it's going to be intent, because of the fact that once that child did not receive medical help, they knew what they were doing legit from that point. It wasn't the case of, this child just fell out of his crib or took a fall and hit his head or, some sort of accidental injury. They intentionally inflicted harm on this child. And, even when it got to the path, to the point of no return, they knew from that point on that what they were doing was wrong. The intent for me is everything in this case, because, this child not receiving any kind of medical care, and, given his past transgressions, that to me, intent sures it in all along.
I want to mention something. The reason why I came with that is in California Penal Code. Check out this back part here. So there is the unlawful killing of a human being or fetus with malice aforethought. So it can be intent to kill or acting with a conscious disregard for human life and extreme recklessness. Negligence versus murder. So that says it right there. Negligence versus murder. Ordinary negligence, careless parenting is not enough for murder. Gross negligence causing a child's death can rise to involuntary manslaughter. If prosecutors can prove the parent's failure to act was so reckless, it showed conscious disregard for Emmanuel's life, that can be charged as implied malice murder. Parents have a legal duty to protect their children. If they willfully fail to provide care, seek medical help, or protect the child, and death results, the duty breach can form the basis of homicide charges. Example, cases in California where parents ignored medical emergencies or left children in dangerous conditions have led to murder convictions under implied malice because they're not able to take care of themselves. Right. And you are taking the role to take care of the child the moment you bring him into this world. So now the alleged staged kidnapping and subsequent false statements are not murder themselves, but they strengthen the case by showing consciousness of guilt. They knew Emmanuel was dead or harmed, a coordinated effort to avoid accountability rather than seek help for the child. And this helps prosecutors argue the parents acted with awareness and intent, not just negligence. So now if Emmanuel died because of abuse, neglect, or failure to seek medical attention, that can be prosecuted as murder with implied malice, not just manslaughter. The cover-up adds weight. It suggests they weren't simply careless, but rather knowingly concealed Emmanuel's death. And that's likely why law enforcement has escalated charges to murder even without a body. So yes, in California, negligence combined with failure to act, if extreme enough to show disregard for Emmanuel's life, can be prosecuted as murder under implied malice. And again, if you're on the legal side, let us know how this resonates with you. The alleged cover-up doesn't legally equal murder, but it strongly supports the argument that this was not an accident. It was criminally reckless or intentional act. Anything you want to say on that, Joe, before we close?
Yeah, so just being objective about it, they're going to need to find this child's body in order to prove this. They're going to have to find this child's body to see the condition of the body, how much abuse this child sustained, to even determine whether or not was the child able to be saved? Did the child die because of lack of medical attention? To me, they're gonna have to find this child's body in order to shore up that case. I just don't see them. I don't see them being able to progress with malice murder without having this child's body. You got to have some sort of documented, evidentiary past on this child in order to prove this.
Yeah. Now, obviously, you see the mother with the black eyes. So I don't know how she got it. We may assume that maybe he has beaten her as well. I mean, I wouldn't put it past him. If you could beat a child, you may want to beat your wife, but with that said, I'm thinking with the investigators, if the mother isn't really that directly involved, but maybe influenced, and what I mean by that, maybe she's not the one that hurt the child, but now was involved in the cover-up for whatever her reasons could be, whether it's she loves him or whether out of fear, which is still not an excuse, but we have to know these things because these are arguments that they're going to push forward. They may be able to approach the mother and her and get her to help discover where the body is. Yeah. And now he's got no leverage because I think the only thing he has is if she doesn't give up where the body is, he could have some type of leverage, which could lessen his sentence. But it'll be interesting to see where they go, because if they do find the body, could they push for the death penalty for him and a lesser charge for her? I'm curious to see if she'll cooperate once she's free from his influence. That's going to be unique too, because maybe one thing, I'm not saying she's right or wrong, but hear me out. One thing could be, he could be pressuring her, and maybe that's the case. But once you free her and provide her safety, maybe the story starts to change. And again, I'm just trying to be somewhat objective, even though like today we're focusing on Jake. I don't know how objective I was, but I'm trying to be objective and fair. Hey, Joe, this was a great topic. We have more to come. I like discussing these. You get to learn a lot in the process, and the audience really does help us. Do you have anything you'd like to say in closing? Because I don't think people are going to find this type of information anywhere else. That's just my opinion. But Joe, what's your thoughts? Anything in closing?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how this unfolds. You know, it's easy to influence somebody when you're directly in contact with them and they're with them all the time. Now that they're separated, it's going to be interesting to see what unfolds with her. To see if she's had that epiphany that, you know, she's in deep shit, and we're that she's able to tell him where the body is. That's even if she knows where the body is. He may have, you know, done that on his own without telling her, just so, you know, she would be able to give the information. You know, it's going to be interesting to see this unfold and see what plays out with it.
Well, now what we'll do is we'll keep track of it, because then what we could do is we can go back to this episode and then expand on where we go next, depending on which way they go, because we gave people a lot to talk about here. Remember, guys, feel free to answer the questions that we've asked, because this is probably, and I like to think, what's going on in the minds of people that are trying to resolve this case. I think this is kind of what they're all going through right now, and I figured I would try to do my best to put it out there so you can kind of see you know, how this rolls out, and also be a part of it. You know, these are some of the questions that I feel you guys can also answer, because again, you guys are giving me the information that builds this dialogue. So as always, guys, the show is Tier Talk. If you haven't, please subscribe, enjoy the content, and we are going to be pushing out more true crime stuff. And again, for those that work in corrections, it does apply. But I have over 1,700 videos of correctional material out there, so feel free to browse through them. But right now, because of the support that's coming from the true crime community, I am going to focus a little more of my content on the true crime stuff, just to keep the channel moving. And here's the benefit of it all. And I think this is the benefit. Once we start building an audience and people start respecting who we are, then maybe we could toss up some correctional content once in a while and have greater support, because now we have a community that supports who we are because they know who we are. And I think there's a long-term application to this. Just work with me. But more true crime to come. I'm loving it. Just very interesting. The stuff that you can learn when, you know, just by keeping yourself open and listening to those comments. As always, guys, stay safe. Joe,